Thank you. Okay, Linda. Faces behind the story. Stories. Tell us your story.
I would imagine it's probably not terribly different from many, many other people. I grew up in a lower middle class family in Montgomery, Alabama. I had a very lovely, kind, passive father whose basic overriding belief was, if you just don't say anything, the bad stuff will go away. And then I had a mother who was gorgeous and smart and funny and also a borderline schizophrenic alcoholic. Her core belief was, you don't want to do what I tell you to do, I will make you do it. So she kind of pushed the world around, and my dad and I kind of got caught up in that. She was very abusive physically and mentally. And I grew up believing, truly, deeply believing, that I was a bad person, that I had no redeeming qualities. I had been told, I wish you'd never been born. And I believed her. I believed that there must be something very wrong with me if she thinks I should never have been born. So those beliefs led me to make some really interesting choices as I was growing up and I was in school, especially by the time I got to high school. I had adapted to that environment in a way that kept me safe. I figured if I just do everything as perfectly as possible, if I make great grades and I'm nice to everyone, I please everyone, I always do what I'm told, that I would be safe. So you can imagine, as I got into school, how much stress that created for me. I wanted to be everybody's friend. So I never stood up for myself. I never said what I wanted. I just went along, kind of like my dad, went along. And that ultimately took me to the time I was 19, graduated from high school. By the time I was 19, I was living by myself because my mother and father had gotten a divorce and they went in separate ways. And they left me at this home that they had together, which ultimately got repossessed. But there I was, and for the first time in my life, I was totally alone. I got to make choices for me. So what did I do? Well, I got pregnant. I'll show them. I'll do exactly what I want to do. Well, that wasn't what I wanted to do, but that's what happened. And slowly but surely, I figured out this is not a life plan.
Yeah.
The baby daddy absolutely did not want to get married. He was only 18. I was 19. I ended up staying with friends for about 3 weeks at a time as I got more and more pregnant until the point where I didn't have anywhere to go. I think I was about 5 or 6 months pregnant and I didn't have anywhere to go. So it's a lot of blackout times in my life then. I don't really remember what happened. I do remember sitting on the beach once, and I remember a woman coming up to me because I was crying and saying, "Are you okay?" And I said, I don't have a home. I don't have a place to sleep. Now, where had I been up to that time? I don't know. Did I have a suitcase with me? Did I have a brown paper bag with a toothbrush in it? I don't know.
You don't know or you don't remember?
Oh, I don't remember.
You don't remember. So the blackout times were also things that you didn't want to remember.
Exactly. I didn't want to remember that. I'm sure it was very painful. She said, well, you can come and stay with me for a while. And I literally stayed at this stranger's house for, again, these weird little 3-week times. Somehow, someone suggested that I probably should go see an obstetrician. And about 6.5 or 7 months pregnant, I don't know how I got there. I just remember being at his office. And when the nurse asked me to put my address down, I told her, I don't really have one. Kindest woman in the world ended up befriending me and asking her family if they could bring me in. And they did. And I stayed with them for the last 2 months of my pregnancy, and I had my beautiful baby boy, Miles, there. And ultimately, my son's name is Miles. Miles's dad came back up from Miami where he was staying, and one thing led to another, and we ended up getting to keep this amazing little baby only if we got married. Mm-hmm. Weird times in 1967.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was true or they were just putting pressure on us, but I was thrilled because that's all I wanted. And so I became a single mom. After 1 year, we stayed married for 1 year, and I got to be home with him for 1 year. I was so happy about that. But I suffered from so much depression and anxiety. And I remember there were times when I just didn't think I could make it. But I had my baby boy, and I knew I had to make it. And ultimately, a year later, after Miles was born, I got a divorce, and now I'm really on my own. Single mom, baby boy, 2 years old. By the time I was 21, he was 2 years old. I was working as a front desk receptionist at a law office, making $55 a week, suffering from anxiety attacks, panic attacks, clinical depression.
Did you know that you had clinical depression? Did you know you had anxiety, but you didn't know where it came from? Or tell me about that part.
I knew I had something very wrong with me. But if you think about it, I had always thought there was something wrong with me. But this was so debilitating that there were times I came really close to taking my life because it was terrifying. The panic and the terror was so intense that I remember thinking I couldn't possibly make it for another day, another hour, another moment in this place of what felt like to me insanity. And I remember again thinking, I don't think I can make it. I'm ready to die. I remember I woke up on December 7th, 1969, and I fell right into that dark place. I was lying in bed. I had the covers up around my neck. I was shaking. I was terrified. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm ready now. I can't go anymore. I'm ready to die. And that's when I heard my little boy stirring in the room next to me. And on some level, I knew I had to make it, at least for this one more day. So I got up, I got dressed, I got him dressed and fed. I took him to daycare so he would be safe. And then my car just drove me to work. I was on autopilot. I couldn't think. I couldn't make decisions. I just drove to work. I went inside, sat down at that receptionist desk, and just felt like I was hanging on to my sanity by this tiny little thread. And that's the morning at about 11:15 a.m. when in through the front door burst a man in a convict prison uniform, brandishing a .357 Magnum. It turns out that he was an escaped convict. He had jumped the road gang he was on, jumped the guard, stole a gun, fled on foot, went into the first office he found, and it was mine. And he grabbed me by the arm, and he slammed the gun in my face. And he said to the two attorneys who were standing there then, I'm leaving. Give me your car keys. Give me your money. I'm taking her with me. Don't call the cops or I will kill her. Well, he then proceeded to drive around, or had me drive around in one of the attorney's cars, and ultimately took me to an abandoned house that he knew about. Well, it wasn't abandoned until he got there, and then his friend who lived there saw what was happening and said to him, "Look, you can have the house. Just let me leave and make sure my kids don't come home, and I won't tell anyone." And he did. She left, and we were in that house for about 6 hours.
And what were you feeling at that time?
Well, I had learned hypervigilance, a state of being so highly aware of potential danger that it was kind of a familiar state to me. However, it was jacked up to about 1,000%. My brain was working overtime. All I could think about was, how do I get away from this crazy man? Now, at one point inside the room, he had allowed me to sit in a chair about 5 feet away from where he was sitting. And he was just sitting there staring at me, gripping that gun with a death grip, not saying a word. I couldn't talk. I felt like the blood vessels in my body had just come to a dead stop, that they were frozen. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he slowly raised the gun. He pointed it directly between my eyes, and his exact words were, "Are you ready to die?" Well, how ironic. I mean, I'd just been thinking about that, 7 hours earlier? But in that moment, it was the oddest thing. I remember thinking, no, I don't. And again, my brain on this hyper high speed calculation of every single thing going on, I kept trying to find a way to, in some way, build some rapport with him or establish some kind of connection with him so that he would relax a little bit and maybe I could find a way to escape. And that's what happened. Over 6 hours, with a lot going on in between. But ultimately, I found a way to escape. The fascinating thing was, and I was just talking to my therapist about this recently, she was asking me, when did your panic attacks and anxiety attacks and depression start? And I said, well, back in my teens. She said, how long did they go into your life? And I said, well, in my early 20s. And then I said, up until the time that I was kidnapped. And I said, but it's interesting. I don't remember having them. I don't remember having a panic attack. I don't remember having any more anxiety attacks. My depression wasn't gone, but I don't remember that after the kidnapping. Now, yes, I was seeing a therapist several times a week at first. He was helping me process everything that happened. I said, but to my therapist, I don't remember having any more of those panic attacks. And she said, that makes sense, And I said, why? She said, trauma is unrelenting helplessness. It's feeling helpless with no way out. And that was your state all growing up, with your mother, when you were a teenager, when you were a single mom. You felt helpless. There were no answers. There was no hope. There was no nothing, because you didn't have the ability to take care of yourself. But you had this one life-altering experience where you stepped up. You took care of you. You managed the situation. You said, helpless? No. Not now. Watch me. I managed to get out of that, and it was through sheer ingenuity and thinking and processing and the right word at the right time in the right way. And ultimately, I escaped. She said, "You broke the pattern."
Yeah.
Now, I always knew I walked away thinking, well, I'm a lot stronger than I thought I was. But what I didn't realize was I had broken the pattern. And all of a sudden, the healing could become a reality for me. It didn't just fix itself. It still took a lot of work to unravel all that.
So in actuality, what I see too is it gave you an opportunity to be in control. You saw that as, number one, you didn't want to die. Number two, that I need to get out of this. And what's my best way of getting? So anxiety didn't come into the picture. Nothing came into the picture except, to me personally, your higher self that said, okay, let's look at this realistically. What's my best way of getting out of this?
You know, it's fascinating that part of that is very true. But what I remember experiencing was that there were two of me in this entire experience. One was running around screaming for her life, throwing herself down on the floor, begging for mercy. The other one was like, no, 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 I've got this. Just leave it to me. There was a battle going on back and forth, which I'm sure that strong, confident, capable one maybe had always been there for me, but I never knew it until that moment. She stepped up and said, I'll take care of you.
Yeah.
And it was very stressful, very anxiety provoking, the whole experience. I think, I'll tell you how anxiety provoking it was. I was on Valium at the time. My doctor had me on 4 milligram Valium 4 times a day, or 5 milligrams. I think it was 5 milligrams 4 times a day. I take a half a Valium these days to go to the dentist, and I fall asleep in the chair. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to live your life on 20 milligrams of Valium per day. Well, that I had already had 2 by the time he took me hostage, and yet that did nothing to dampen my hyper vigilant, intense focus to protect myself.
When that situation ended because you escaped, did you immediately think, I need to get mental health help?
The very good news for me is that I had been seeing Emil Cadal at the Family Counseling Center probably sometimes as much as 3 or 4 times a week because of my anxiety attacks and my panic attacks and my depression. Sometimes it would be so bad I would call him on the phone from work and I would say, I can't make it. Please, 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 can you see me? And if he could at all, he always did. It was a sliding scale fee. $1 sometimes is all I paid. And he would see me. I would sit there in his office shaking, and somehow he would hold me up and help me get to the next hour. So I had been seeing him up to this point. So it only made sense that the next day when this kidnapping hit the newspapers, every doctor I'd ever had called me. Mr. Cadal called me. Everyone was like, how can I help? How can I help? And of course, I immediately went to see Mr. Cadal. I don't remember a lot afterwards. It's kind of like the shock had set in. But I do remember that I went to him just as I had been going to him. I say to this day, he saved my life. He saved my life. Prior to that kidnapping, he kept me alive. And afterwards, he helped me sort through it and figure out, okay, let's look at what happened here. Let's process, let's unpack this. My word, You performed pretty brilliantly in those 6 hours now, didn't you? At that point, I'm like, I don't even know. I'm just here, and I'm trying to figure out how all this happened. He helped make sense of it. I believe he saved my life. I really do.
Yeah, that's great. So I just have one question to go back just a little bit. So when you got into that idea of suicide, you couldn't be here anymore. Did you at that time or that period of time say, you know, I need to get help because there's something wrong? Because originally you said, you know, let's not talk about it. What was the inclination you had to get help in the first place?
The really good news is that for as sick as my mother was, as tortured as she was, she had a really keen understanding of how sick she was and how sick our family was. So she had taken us as a family to go see Mr. Goodall at the Family Counseling Center when I was a teenager. And so maybe we had 2 or 3 sessions with him, so I knew he existed, and I liked him, but I never had seen him one-on-one. So then after I got married and divorced and I'm on my own, and those panic attacks started setting in with such vengeance, and I knew I could not make it on my own. I knew I couldn't. But some part of me, and I think this is true for many people, there's a little tiny voice inside you saying, I need help. A little tiny voice in there, and thank you. That's the one I listened to, because I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, can I see you? And he said, of course. And that began the relationship that helped to get me through those really tough times. I could not have done it without him. I wouldn't have been able to make sense of it. I would have succumbed to my illness and taken my own life. I just would not have been able to. But if it was that little small voice that said, you need help, go find help. And fortunately, I listened to it. And fortunately, I had some reference of a person who could help. And that's why I think it's so important for people to know what resources are available to them. Know who's out there who can help them, because then if they have those moments where they just don't think they can make it, maybe that person will come to their mind and they'll think, you know, maybe I should call him or her. And I think that's the greatest hope we have, is to find help.
And I think, too, that maybe they'll listen to that little voice. Because inherently, I really feel that we have that voice. We all have that voice.
I agree with you. I think we do have that voice. And I think if you look at examples of people who have tried to kill themselves and at the last minute somehow managed to survive, they report that as it was happening, they didn't want it to happen. They regretted it. They had the little voice that went, oh, no, 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 this is not what I want. But for some people, it was just too late. They'd already made that commitment. But for many people, for most people, there is a little tiny voice in there that says, I need help. Now, the good news is, I think we live in a community where there's a lot of help available. And I really believe we have got to destigmatize talking about it. That it has to be as comfortable as talking about, so where are you working out? What vitamins are you taking? What, protein powders do you use? We talk about that. Why don't we talk about, man, I've been feeling some anxiety lately. I need to get some help with this. Oh, me too. I've had that. How about this person? They might be helpful for you. Make it just as easy as talking about the latest protein powder you got.
Yeah, I think that's so very true. So if I were to, when you hear the words share your light, what does that mean to you?
I think we are all born with this amazing, I think we're all born with a lot of gifts. But for many of us, there was no acknowledgement of those gifts. We grew up thinking that we were in some way flawed and that there was something wrong with us. So we really hadn't gotten in touch with those beautiful gifts that we all have. Well, now I think there's an awareness that's growing. I hope it's growing, that people are beginning to say, wait a minute, hold on just a second. I can do that. I have value. I can be helpful to other people. Whatever their superpower is, I can make people laugh. I can make people feel warm and comfortable. I can give people a helping hand. All those gifts that we have, I think people are beginning to say, well, let me let that out. Let me shine my light for the world and say, can I help? Is there some way I can help you? I think it gets us out of our own head and our own concerns and our own fears. I think we all grow up thinking that there's something wrong with us on some level, more or less for other people. But when we can say, you know what, in many, many cases, it's not about me. And if I can help you, oh, I do have value, don't I?
Yeah, and if I can help myself by asking for help.
Perfect.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So also, if I were to tell you that one of the things that we're considering is putting together a program for youth that helps with resiliency and coping skills, what do you feel is important for kids to know today in order to destigmatize? Or if we did do that program, which we are, why is it important?
Young people today have more stressors and anxiety, I think, than we ever had when we were younger. It's a scary world out there. And many parents are struggling just to make it from paycheck to paycheck. And I'm sure they would all love to help their children through these tough times, but just don't have the time or resources or energy to do it. So kids are on their own a lot. Wouldn't it be great if there was a place that they could go where they got validated, where those gifts that we all have, each and individually, each one of them got to discover that and see how that could bring light to the world if they shared it? What a whole different focus for them. I would love to see that happen.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Well, I was going to ask this one. If you could come up with your mental health wellness in 3 words at this moment in your life, what would that be? You still see a therapist. Therapy is important.
I'm trying to find 3 words.
Maybe it's got to be more than 3 words.
I think it's precious. I think mental health, mental well-being is a precious, precious thing, never to be taken for granted. I will see a therapist until the day I die. Not every day, not even every week, but it's someone who can help me sort out questions that I have, who can ask me provocative questions that get me thinking. So I think having that resource available is the reason why, one of the big reasons why, I feel as mentally healthy as I do today. So I do believe that having a therapist and finding the one that's right for you. I've had a couple that I went, well, you're great, but not for me. But when you find the one, that's the one. That, for me, it's about continually looking at my blessings. I mean to tell you, it is hard to be depressed and grateful at the same time. It's hard to be angry and grateful at the same time. I literally consciously choose to shift my perspective from what's wrong to what is right. And that helps me refocus, shifts my perspective, and centers me and grounds me.
I love that. It's so appropriate for me for today. That's such a good thing. And between you and me, I think that grateful shower thing is such an amazing thing. I do. I loved all of your statements, and I think that just before I asked that question, what you talked about kids and the importance of them being in a group and being able to say, I'm not okay. Extremely important. And I think that for what you said, you made that statement, I'm going to put you on last because that is an extremely important part of what we want to do. This event is about sharing your light as you're doing, but also it's about how do we take care of our kids? What do we need to do to prepare so that your mother is not repeated in today's mother?
That's such a great point. And the good news, I studied social work. That was my undergraduate work, was in social work. Why? Because of Emil Kadal and what he did for me. I thought, I want to do that for other people too. And one of the things I did in my internship was to co-facilitate a group of young people, of teenagers who were struggling, and to watch them come in to a group session, anxious, uncomfortable, protective, and then watch them slowly start to share and to open up and to realize they are not alone. You could just feel the tension dripping out of the room. It was as if they were saying, oh, you're just like me. I'm not so weird. It was one of the most gratifying experiences of my life.
Yeah, and I think also the point that you made, and Kelvin has made the same point about, let's not rock the boat. Let's not talk about this. Let's just make believe everything's okay. And it isn't even about making believe. It's really more about your neighbor. It's more about the people that you know, that there is this picture perfect family that really, in essence, doesn't exist. Because there is always going to be problems and there are always going to be situations. And if we keep them buried, then there won't be any sunshine from darkness.
That's a great metaphor. And I think the thing that you're talking about that resonates so strongly with me is the belief that I remember, or the perspective that my family had, which was, you don't talk about this because what would other people think? Because it was shameful to even talk about mental health. It was shameful. So this was shame piled on shame, piled on shame, because where do you go for help with that? Well, we're going for help right now. We're making programs for kids to get out of that cycle and do exactly what you talked about. Let's don't perpetuate the trauma. Let's say, enough is enough. It's time to stop this. Let's create these programs where kids can come in and break those cycles that have kept them from expressing their joy, their gifts, their talents, their skills. Let's break that cycle.
Yeah, very good point. I love it.